All right, so I will be presenting on RD1, Architectural Design Research, Integrating Security in the Public Realm, and I'll be specifically focused on our work on the first 3 years, which was focused on school security. We have a broader project looking at different types of venues, but this was the first area of focus. And I'll just say to start that as architecture researchers, we see very little originating from architectural discourse on this topic. But in the realm of practice, architects, especially those designing schools, are increasingly needing to consider security in addition to and competing with many other design goals. And so our project aims to build a new research area in our field and to translate the findings into evidence-based guidance that can, in a visual form that can guide practitioners. To support SENTRY's decision support framework, our research looks to understand how these security design decisions are made and what impacts they might have. What we found is an abundance of recommendations on school security out there, but the references to their efficacy was scarce, or the quality of evidence presented was often unclear. So this represents a problem for schools making decisions in very different contexts with finite resources and in light of trade-offs and potential for some well-intended recommendations to be harmful. So our systematic research analyzes qualitative data, not only in the literature, but also interviews and in official reports of mass shootings in schools in the United States, and tries to validate that knowledge and create new evidence-based visual guidance that can show how it can be adapted to different contexts and building types. To validate that knowledge, we are triangulating between different sources of data. We start with reviewing hundreds of recommendations across the literature. We organize them into categories. We find how frequently they appear across all the different documents. We found that the vast majority of them, for example, are in the planning, a kind of procedural phase. So how to get teams together, how to think about the problem, who to include, all very good and important, but not directly architectural. A second grouping with medium frequency are considerations of barriers and entry control, and these focus on other approaches focus on creating a positive climate. These two are not necessarily opposite to each other, but the relationship between barriers, closing in, and the culture of the places is nuanced and complex. So that needs to be explored. The less frequently recommended are actually a subset of recommendations on technology, tools for reporting, personnel, etc. We found much more of that being driven by manufacturers and vendors. So practitioners need to sort through a lot of fragmented marketing with little guidance and evidence. On the top right, you can see early analysis of the evidence where we looked at how many citations each recommendation had and found a general trend that more widely recommended ideas have more citations, which is good. But there are some concerning deviations where you see recommendations with little citations of evidence showing up more often than the recommendations with better support. In this chart, we're not necessarily saying anything about the quality of the evidence, but that is also part of our work. When we look at what is actually happening in these mass shooting incidents in schools, we study official reports and we code them, we analyze them. We find the built environment mentioned in reports that are focused on how specific technologies may have failed or may have helped. But we also see a significant focus on circulation, corridors, stairs, basically the evacuation zones, or access for first responders, people moving through spaces. We're seeing some alignment of this data with the interviews. Now, we made sure we talked to a good sample of design teams that specialize in schools, specifically K through 12, not including higher ed, noting that we only made interviews in the US, so we worked to get representation from all different parts of the country. And we stopped interviews when we reached saturation, when we were not getting any new information. The analysis uses software. We found many alignments with the literature, but we also found emerging codes or practices. So that is new emerging problems that designers are trying to solve for, or what hypotheses they might have about what the built environment can do and how they're innovating within that space. We translated these ideas into design research. So we tested how these emerging ideas can be applied in different scenarios, or how interventions can recognize and mitigate trade-offs. And then we're now in the phase of peer reviewing these guidelines with designers, school districts, government officials to understand and validate that the guidance can be adapted to their own context, that it's usable by different audiences, and that we're aware of any potential limitations or additional trade-offs. I think a big takeaway we found is that while the literature references theories from crime prevention through environmental design, which is more focused on keeping intruders out and ideas of natural surveillance of who belongs and who doesn't, We found that architects and the communities they work with are more interested in making decisions with an awareness of these extreme events, but they're prioritizing more frequent security concerns that are encountered on a day-to-day basis, which tend to happen with people within the school community. So bullying, abuse, domestic situations that may spill into the school. And they're thinking much more holistically about this problem. When addressing these more extreme events, they are innovating beyond what is in current guidelines to reduce triggers, to empower people to respond or intervene or find safety. And this, in our view of the literature, better aligns with a less cited framework that called situational crime prevention, which is focused on reducing opportunities, improving visibility, understanding routines, time constraints, people's decision-making in specific situations. For example, how to facilitate response, empower people to make better decisions in the environment to protect themselves and others, et cetera. And so we see some parallels between the difference between resistance and resilience. And I think this presents an opportunity for us to, as researchers, to develop design scenarios that can be tested with collaborators. In this case, we're working with collaborators at SENTRY from University of Southern California, and Birching, who you will hear about from next, and for colleagues in Rutgers, who do agent-based simulations to glean how some of these innovations and hypotheses about the built environment might affect the decisions and the agency of building occupants. One understudied aspect of design for security is the role of typologies, or simply spatial organization of school buildings. This was a subtext in the interviews and sometimes explicitly mentioned. So we decided to bring it to the foreground to study variabilities in attributes like circulation, evacuation, number of exits, shelter. And we analyzed a sample of real school buildings in a variety of contexts, and we organized them into a matrix and then abstracted them into 4 typologies that we think represent most school buildings. To collaborate with our colleague Birching and her team at USC, we worked in designing a control experiment. So basically designing the same school community for the same size of population, program, age group in these 4 different types. So here's 2 examples of a bar building, a cluster building. The cluster building actually emerged from the idea shared by the interviewing the designers of the new Newtown School. That is breaking the scale of a larger community where everybody into smaller learning communities where everybody knows each other, notices, struggles, intervenes. And so we represented that in this typology of the cluster school. And zooming in into one of these clusters, you can see how we also combine that with another idea of creating open, flexible learning spaces that are shared by all the classrooms in a learning community to allow observation. The trade-off, of course, being that shared spaces are not bounded or lockable. So a mitigation tactic is to have thresholds that can automatically lock the branch corridor from the main corridor, separating different parts of the school. And this is one potential advantage that we will explore in comparing a bar type with a cluster type, for example. And we are doing this with other strategies like demarcating shelter areas in classrooms to understand trade-offs and mitigations, and then the simulations will hopefully shed some light on the effectiveness of that strategy in agent-based models and understand how that might differ between different typologies. Anyway, that's it. These visual guidelines obviously have serve the primary end users, which are school districts, their design and construction teams, and we're working with CISA, which has the School Safety Task Force of the federal government to peer review and disseminate this work in the coming weeks. And our goal is to replicate this methodology in other venue types. Specifically, we're starting to work on the transportation venues. That's it. Thank you so much.